Hi, and welcome to Axelbank Reports History and Today, conversations with America's top nonfiction authors and why their books matter right now. I'm Evan Axelbank, and today we're going to speak with Seth Wickersham, the author of American Kings, a biography of the quarterback. This is his second book, and he is a journalist for ESPN. Seth, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, man, my pleasure. Good to
Before
see
we
you.
start, yeah, good to see you and good to meet you. Before we start our interview, I want to invite listeners to our Patreon page to ask for your support in keeping the show going. Go to patreon.com/Axelbank History. We will donate part of your contributions to a charity for children's literacy. When Eli Manning first started with the Giants in 2004, one of my favorite sports articles ever written was by Michael Lewis. It described
Mm.
the education of Eli Manning. It showed how this aw shucks kind of guy who could have had a much bigger personality sort of ho hummed his way through life and through football games. So the Giants owner and general manager went down to Ole Miss to watch him play, and at first they were relatively bored by him. Then the article sort of describes this magical ability to snap out of it and lead his team to victory. And the owner said, "That's our guy." Now, it was a full foreshadow of what would happen in Super Bowls 42 and 46, the idea of a quarterback and magic. Quarterback and magic. Where does that come from? Isn't it just a guy out there doing his best, or do they have this sort of sixth sense ability to turn it on when it matters?
Yeah, thank you. No, that's the that's the indescribable trait of quarterbacks, and that's the big differentiator. I think that look, when you've spent as much time around quarterbacks as I have, and I've been at ESPN for 25 years now, which is crazy. But if you cover the NFL for ESPN, you cover quarterbacks. And even after all this time, I felt like there was a bigger story that I wanted to tell about them. And there's no doubt that there's this ineffable quality, this otherness that separates the great ones. And I was trying, I think that we tend to look at quarterbacks in a couple different ways. Like, number one, we jump on, they're such an instrument for hope. So we either jump on something they do that's brilliant or something they do that's horrible and kind of use that to define them. Or, and I think this has really come up the past 10 or so years, but it's like, or we kind of veer into like this business school jargon with them, um, and almost speak about them as if they're, these kind of CEOs when, there's just something that clicks for them when chaos is swirling around them, and when um, you know they're not supposed to come through. And one of the things that I got at the book, which is interesting, is how that kind of ability and that confidence in those situations tend to be formed at a pretty young age. Like Tom Brady's second start and John Elway's second start, I think they were each 14 years old, but they led comebacks in them. And, if something fastened for good in them during those moments where, they knew they could do it at a certain stage in the game. And so it almost became like expected. And rather than that being a hindrance, that became something that kind of liberated them. And that mental shift right there is really a fascinating thing that the greats kind of go through. I think that, in respect to Eli Manning, I mean, Eli had the capacity to just look horrible for 50 minutes of the game. And,
He really did.
even in some of his most brilliant moments, he was MVP of two Super Bowls. The first one, he came very close to costing the Giants that game many times. He threw it right to Asante
Yeah.
Samuel on the last drive, and he almost fumbled a couple times on that drive. In the second one, it was pretty obvious that he had a confidence that, you know, was greater than the game's greatest coach and the game's greatest quarterback, and you saw it play out on the big stage. And when he hits that beautiful pass to Manningham, which I think personally is the greatest throw I've ever seen in person, given the situation, the circumstance, and the defensive mind on the other end of the ball. everybody, I was there at that game. I mean, everybody knew it's over because he had done something, even though I think they were still like maybe 60 some yards away from the end zone
Yeah,
at that point.
yeah.
But like everybody knew it was over because he had taken control of the game. And that's something that, again, separates these guys.
Before we go one more yard here, I want to just say that axlebankhistory.com was designed by Nikki Rideout of Ellie Claire Designs. It has our most recent episodes on it, featured episodes, and also a link to our Patreon page. Again, that promotes children's literacy. So check out Nikki's work. Usually, this is a podcast that focuses on history in more of a political and social sense, as opposed to a player at one position in a sporting event. So make the sale to us history nerds, Seth. Before we even get to quarterbacking, describe how football was invented in the 1880s and how it reflected the post Civil War society.
Well, my book is not a history of the forward pass, but it contains a big chunk of it that's essentially a history of the quarterback. And I think that, like, you know, something that surprised me in the course of reporting was that I thought from the moment that the forward pass was legalized in college football, that was 1906, people were dying in college football. And they needed to figure out a way to keep people from dying, which is kind of, we think about all the things that all the responsibilities that we ascribe to a quarterback. And one of the most basic ones is he was invented to keep, people
Right.
from dying, which is pretty interesting. But, look, you know, we're entering a very interesting moment in American history at that point. And I thought that the quarterback celebrity would kind of be a slow rise. And it really took off in a hurry. And there was a game in October of 1906. It was Wesleyan playing at Yale. And Wesleyan's head coach was really, really smart. And he devised some pretty interesting passing plays considering all the rules and restrictions that were on passing. And the quarterback, Sam Moore, completed this pass. And the Yale crowd, which of course is a hostile crowd, sees him do it and they give him a standing ovation. I mean, they knew that they had seen something unique even in that moment. And by 1920, you have quarterbacks like this guy Bo McMillan for Teeny Center College. They played at Harvard. They beat Harvard in 1921, and he goes back to Kentucky and they throw a parade for the team. The governor says he'd rather trade places with him. And at that point you're starting to see quarterback on the level of his wedding was an announcement in the New York Times. Again, this is 1921. So at that point you're starting to see quarterback at a level of the positions that we hold in America as its most prestigious. And then I think the next huge shift, and this really mirrors, I think that like our values and history to a certain extent, but like the next big shift I think happens in the 1940s, where you have this star quarterback named Bob Waterfield. He played at UCLA and then for the Cleveland Rams.
I love the old
And
quarterback names, by the way.
great
Teeny,
quarterback.
yeah, yeah.
Great. I think it's one of the requirements. You kind of have to have a great quarterback name. I mean, Warren Moon, I
Right,
mean, like you knew
right,
he was going to be good with that
right.
name. But you know, then in 1945, you have Bob Waterfield, who was, a really attractive, good-looking guy. Kind of looked like James Dean before James Dean was James Dean, and his girlfriend and wife then is Jane Russell, who was kind of, was a huge Hollywood pinup girl and actress. They met in high school, kind of off and on throughout college, but like they get married and he gets drafted by the Cleveland Rams. That year, his rookie year, they win the championship. And the owner of the team sees a huge opportunity and he moves the team from Cleveland to Los Angeles. And part of the reason why he moved the team, first team west of the Mississippi, first professional sports team, but one of the reasons why he moved them was because he saw an opportunity here with a Hollywood celebrity wife and a superstar quarterback to really join these two growing American forces, entertainment forces. And so they become like one of the country's first power couples and maybe the first sports power couple that existed. And the earliest iterations of paparazzi followed them around and parties at their house overlooking the valley became these events for luminaries. And I think that was really the cultural collision that set the stage for like so much of how we view quarterbacks.
Mm. I was a quarterback once. Those are the first words of your book.
I was going
And
to say,
that's
me too.
that's funny. So was I. I wasn't fast. I wasn't tough enough even to play touch football. I didn't have outstanding hands to catch a football. I did catch a baseball, but not a football. But I love playing quarterback, QB as we called it in the schoolyard on 104th and Madison in New York, at my elementary school. And it was sort of a dream when there was an odd number of players because I was good enough to be the official QB, which is what they called it. How did your feelings about being a quarterback drive you to one day study quarterbacks?
It was huge because I was obsessed with quarterbacking from, ages 12 through 16. And I played it some. I had some good games and I had some bad games, but it ended for me and it ends for everyone at some point. But like it's when I realized that quarterback isn't something you play, it's something that you live. I mean, it becomes your self-identity in a way that I don't think happens in any other position in global sports. Like, so I have an idea of what it's like to walk through the high school hallways as a quarterback, and I have an idea of what it's like to walk through the hallways not as a quarterback. And I think that like even though I'm not trying to sound like Uncle Rico here, um, I had a feeling, a gut feeling that like, look, if this takes over my self-identity as much as it did, and I was a mediocre player, just imagine what it does for the great ones. Just imagine for those who do it in college. Well, just imagine those who do it who are nationally famous in high school. Imagine what it does for those in college who, that's like some of the prime moments of their life. Maybe they don't go on to the NFL, but they know what it's like to be the biggest man on campus. What's it like when you're in the NFL and you're like a face of a city in a weird way. And then finally, like what is it like when you retire and everyone kind of knows you for what you were at age 30? Like Bruce Springsteen always talks about when he's done with a tour, like depression sets in. He's used to an entire universe revolving around him, and then at home he's
He's just Bruce. Yeah, he's just
well,
some
he's
guy.
a
Yeah.
highly paid chauffeur, right? and um but he can go back out on tour, whereas like these guys, there is no next game. And so I knew from my little experience, like having a glimpse of what it was like to do this, that like I could only imagine what it was like for these guys who do it at the highest level, and that made me want to go find out.
Mm. The teen movie with the white quarterback who gets all the girls, who discovers the proverbial odd man out is actually an undiscovered talent. You lose your mind watching so many of these movies with that crazy archetype. Where does that archetype come from? Because, history is seldom so neat and tidy. Why did pop culture put quarterbacks into this box?
Yeah, I think it was because it's this very odd thing and the ability to throw a spiral. I mean, that's it. It's a beautiful, uniquely American um, act. And, again, it's like going back to 1906 with Sam Moore. It's like the crowd there realized that like anybody could throw a football, but only a quarterback could make people cheer. And I think that like the idea of um, someone leading a group of men in the sport that in we really for a long time now have placed as our national sport, um, is something that just captured people. And it like it, Steve Young and I, for the book, at one point we sat down, we were in his office, and I said, how many hats do you have to wear as a starting quarterback for an NFL team? And it was fascinating to hear him rattle them off. It was everything from field general to matinee idol to spokesperson for a multi-billion dollar organization, chief philanthropist, breathtaking asshole at times, amateur psychologist, um, top-notch student, like all of these things. And we stopped at like 17. And we realized later that there was probably at least another dozen. No other position in global sports requires so much of you. Like the moment you become a quarterback, people kind of fill you with their hopes and imagine that you're just good at all of these different things. And my book shows how hard it is. There's so many joys to playing quarterback, but it's also really difficult. And um, you know, the skill set required to do all of these things, I think it's even gotten more unique over time. I think that like at this point, quarterback is so big in our zeitgeist, so celebrated, so mythologized that you essentially have to have that trait where you have a bottomless hole in your personality that needs constant adoration and affection. It's really interesting to look at who I think successfully becomes quarterbacks now, because in a lot of ways, the actual thing, making the throws, becomes kind of a secondary thing to being able to handle all the notoriety that comes with it.
So, what did you learn about that? Just given the quarterbacks you've worked with and talked to,
Yeah.
what did you learn about the way their minds work? Because, I mean, the in-game action is simply unbelievable. They've got these guys running at them. They're trying to rip their heads off. You've got, and the wide receivers are running down near the secondary. You've got blocking before the play starts. You've got to identify with the players who could come and get you in the particular coverage that
Yeah.
your offensive line is. How do they train themselves to react so quickly to what's going on around them when you are literally risking your own health and life and safety being out there?
Yeah, so there's two parts of that. There's the on-field aspect of it and the off-field aspect. So the on-field aspect is fascinating because like Sean Payton, the head coach of the Broncos, kind of made it comparable to um, driving a brand new car. And like if he were driving the new Mercedes Benz, he would be, and he's easing onto the highway, he would be gripping the steering wheel and, looking at oncoming traffic and just wanting to get on the road. Whereas like Drew Brees would be gently gripping the wheel. He'd see the oncoming traffic out of one corner of his eye. With the other corner of his eye, he could fiddle with all of the dials, make sure the music's at the right level, make sure the temperature is at the right level for the person on the passenger seat and in the back. It's this ability to multitask easily. And that's like what's so fascinating about it. Um, and we look at some of these quarterbacks like Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, and we see them improvise and we think it's pure athletic ability at the highest level and sandlot ball, when in fact it's much different. I mean, it's watching Coltrane at the Village Vanguard in 1961. These are people who have a PhD level of education in their craft, and then they're ad-libbing and improvising based off of that. It's the opposite actually of freelancing and improving. It's rooted and steeped in a deep, deep understanding of situation and circumstance. And so I think that like when we look at quarterbacks from the outside, we look at the perfect throw to the impossible place at the highest leverage time, kind of like Manning to Manningham. When in fact, I think for them, even though it takes a huge amount of work to do that, that's almost the easiest part. That's the part they don't have to think about. It's everything else that comes with being a quarterback that often becomes the things that they have to think most about and can derail some of these guys.
I got to ask about you because you were at least spent a good portion of your youth in Alaska, which is
Yeah.
fascinating. I really want, and I'm from New York, which is probably like the polar opposite,
Well,
because
my
we were
mom's from New
sort of
York.
what's
Yeah,
that?
my mom is from New York City. We used to
Oh,
joke that she was the only person in Alaska who had a New York accent.
right. When you're in New York, the center of the sports universe revolves around you. And especially when I grew up, the Yankees were great, and the Giants, were certainly much better than they are now. The Rangers had won the Stanley Cup. The Knicks were, looking for a
Yeah.
title. Um, but Alaska doesn't have pro sports, so I'm just
Hmm.
curious. What is the view of pro sports in Alaska? And then the second 1A question to that is what time do the football games come on there?
Yeah, it's early in the morning. Um, uh, so like growing up, so I was a child of the 90s. So really, you know, the idea of so many things that we take for granted now, like Alaska was a very isolated place pre-internet. Like we used to get movies later than everyone else. We never had chain restaurants really. I remember when like Outback opened and it was like a cultural revolution because people were so happy to have Outback. Um, and I think that like, we didn't have, even though like we had cable, obviously, there was no such thing as like getting Sunday ticket. And so you watched the games that people picked for you. And so there was a lot of 49er fans, a lot of Raiders fans, and a lot of Seahawk fans. So those are the games that I kind of grew up watching. And I think that like most of my friends who were football fans were fans of one of those teams. Um, but it is kind of an isolating and strange place. And I think that like now that it's more connected to the rest of the country. Like I remember in high school, you could always tell people who had been to Seattle for the weekend and gone shopping because they had like fancy new jeans that just didn't come in Alaska. And obviously now it's like way more connected to the rest of the country, if not the world. But at the time, it was just kind of like, again, it's an isolating place. And I think that's what kind of draws people to move there, but it also can make it kind of tough. And I just remember
What was your family doing there?
my dad was an attorney and my mom was a special ed teacher, so they could have done those jobs anywhere. They decided to move from Colorado, where I was born, to Alaska. And
What a move.
well, yeah, I guess the mountains weren't big enough in Boulder, Colorado. We needed bigger mountains, I suppose. But it was an interesting place to live. I remember being a quarterback. I went to UCLA football camp, so I was probably like 14 or 15 at
Yeah,
the
that's in the
time.
book. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I went down, and like all the quarterbacks were together, and there was probably like 20 of us or something. And the coaches at UCLA had harped on us that we had to like get to know each other and learn who the and so Terry Donahue, who at the time was the coach of UCLA, pretty renowned college football coach, calls me up in front of everybody, and he says, "Who's this guy?" And someone says Seth, and he was like, "Well, where's he from?" And someone said Alaska, and he looked at me and he goes, "Is that right?"
Are
It
you
was
sure?
funny, but like it was. We all kind of are just limited by our perspective. It's where we grew up, and it wasn't New York City, but that's where I grew up.
When you're in a media, when those of us who have been lucky enough to call this a profession, we often start in these small places and work your way up. And I was prepared to ask you the question of like, okay, what was your first sports reporting job? Expecting you to do what a million of my friends did, which was, cover high school sports and drive around the countryside and go from high school game to high school game to shoot highlights or whatever it was. And I read here that you went from straight from college to ESPN the magazine. So
I
how the
did.
heck did that happen? You did the unthinkable in our business.
Yeah, it is very odd, but like, I think that like when I was in high school, or I'm sorry, when I was in college, I was really motivated. And so I did a lot of internships. So my first internship after I had been at University of Missouri, the first summer I interned at both a TV station in Anchorage and the Anchorage Daily News newspaper. So I was working a ton. So I'd worked at the newspaper during the day and then the TV station at night. And so I was doing a lot of those jobs. Like I was covering whatever task and event, was the lowest on the totem pole. I was shooting. Um, we have these two kind of semi-pro baseball teams in Alaska, the Anchorage Glacier Pilots and the Anchorage Bucks, and I would shoot those games and interview people. So I was really kind of getting that piece of it. And then once I really started to focus on writing, um, I just did a lot of internships. I worked at the Washington Post. I did, all these things I could do. And when I was in college, I worked really hard to get the most that I could. If I was going to go half the way across the country
You
from
went to
Anchorage
Missouri,
to
right? Missouri.
University of Missouri, then like, I was going to get as much as I could out of it. And um, ESPN Magazine and Sports Illustrated, they were letting younger writers write. Like I would kind of study bylines and I would notice like, okay, this person has a story. Like, what's their story? How did they get their job? How long have they been there? And so when it wasn't exactly a linear this linear, but like, when I was graduating, I really tried to aim high and was like, well, I want that job. So I applied at Sports Illustrated and at ESPN and the New York Times. I mean, I had a decent impression of myself, I guess. But fortunately, ESPN had an opening before I graduated, and it took a little bit to get me to full time. But like, they told me that they would, and so 2 weeks after graduation, I was in New York City and going to the ESPN magazine offices, and I want to say like the first week they sent me to Yankee Stadium to do a little story on an Oakland A's pitcher named Jason Isringhausen. So it was like I felt like I was like on top of the world right then. It was crazy.
His name came up in a message with my dad yesterday because we're wondering if the three Mets phenom pitchers now are going to be end up like Seaver, Kuzman, and Gary Gentry, or are they going to wind up as Isringhausen, Pulsifer, and Paul Wilson? With all due respect to them, um,
That I can't answer. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
that's exact. I said we're going to have to let time tell on that one. So, what were your sources for this book? How did you put this together? Is this sort of a compilation of a lot of your stories, or and are you pulling
No.
material from that, or did you go out and investigate and talk with quarterbacks all over the country at every level to figure this out?
The answer is much more of the latter and a little bit of the former. Like, I think I traveled in, so I did the bulk of the reporting for it in 2023 and into 2024. And so, I was traveling a ton, and especially between this and my ESPN job, I mean, I was just all over the place. And I was just gathering anything I could to try to, it's just such a big thing, right? I mean, I'm trying to write a biography of the quarterback. So I'm trying to write about every quarterback basically who's ever lived. So I had to not only like just do a shit ton of work to um, understand everyone's stories, but then had to be really ruthless in terms of who I ended up featuring. And so, I followed around current, people who were in high school at the time. Colin Hurley, this kid out of Jacksonville who entered LSU at age 16, and he was just driven to be, the most precocious quarterback who ever lived. Arch Manning is a way to get into the Mannings. Um, John Elway, Warren Moon. You want to write about Patrick Mahomes in there and like some of these current guys, Kirk Cousins. I wanted to know how religion helps quarterbacks. Um, and so, I'm gathering all this material, and then, the bar for a character had to be two different things. It had to be either I was personally obsessed with their story, or I was obsessed with their situation. Like, it had to be one of those two things. And so, Warren Moon, I mean, think about we talk about how some of these guys have a hard time in high school when they don't have top colleges recruiting you. I mean, that guy had death threats.
Wow,
He had in South Central LA because of
wow.
who he was and because he was a quarterback. And so again, it's like to try. I needed to figure out ways to um, tell these big stories. And then also, there's certain people you can't write a book about quarterbacks without writing about. Johnny Unitas, Joe Namath, Joe Montana to an extent, Tom Brady. So I needed to figure out ways to give them their moment on stage also.
It's easy to be thrown off by the Mannings because they're this sort of hand me down kind of thing at this point. But by my count, it seems like there are very few all-time quarterbacks whose kids became NFL stars or who had dads who were NFL
Yeah.
stars. It seems like it's fewer than baseball. I mean, you got Tatis and you got, of course, the Bonzes and the Griffeys. Um, why do you think that is? Why is football not passed down in that way?
Um, well, in that case, it is. And that's what makes it so crazy because it's like when it comes to the Mannings, is it nature or nurture? What is it about them that, it's like from the moment that Arch Manning picked up a football and decided this was something he wanted to do, the expectations were so insane. And again, that's why I say I think that like to do this job, the way that you navigate fame and the protective bubble that you put yourself in to make it manageable is really the fascinating thing. Um, so Arch Manning's in eighth grade. He's entering ninth grade, and there's a spring game for Newman High School in New Orleans, and he drives the team down the field, and they're about at the 20-yard line. He comes out, he's in the shotgun formation, and he looks to the right, and he sees his receiver covered tightly. So the cornerback was right on him in what's called press coverage. And the route that they had called was uniquely ill suited for that type of coverage. It was easy for the cornerback to cover it. And so he looks at the receiver and he does a little hand signal, just like Uncle Peyton would have. And he signals for the receiver to run deep. And the receiver runs deep. Arch throws him a perfect ball. And it was like the realization of a vision. I mean, people in the stands, the energy was palpable. And Cooper Manning, his dad, who was in the stands next to his friend Richard Montgomery, they just looked at each other like, oh my God, like this is for real. And we got to prepare for this.
This is happening
And
again.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like, because he becomes a good quarterback, it's like because of his family, only being the first pick in the draft is like the what's expected of him, as insane as that is and completely unrealistic, but yet that's a very real place. And so it makes you wonder, like, how is it that this one family is so good at this particular thing? Is it nature or nurture? And then when you look at other guys, I think that like what's interesting is how the shadow of their father, because a lot of sons of quarterbacks become quarterbacks, but the shadow of their dads becomes too much. Like Joe Montana's kids always had their mother's maiden name on the back of their jersey, not Montana.
Oh,
John
fascinating.
Elway's kid, Jack Elway was a good quarterback in Denver, and he ended up playing for a year at Arizona State, but he just got burned out by being John Elway's kid and being a quarterback. And it was hard on him. I mean, again, this is why this job is so different from anything else. And of course, it's not only different because of the pressure, but it's also different because it's so seductive. And even when Jack Elway quit playing football, he missed it. It's like as burned out and as hard as it was, he missed being a quarterback and being that one guy in the huddle that everyone looks at for direction. That's what makes this such a fascinating job.
What one thing I've got to ask you about here is you've talked to these guys
Yeah.
later in life.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm really curious. I think one of the main things going on in football right now, at least as an observer, and I'm not obsessed with football the way I am baseball or hockey.
Yeah.
It is hard for me to watch sometimes because we are now understanding the physical toll that is being taken by these fellas.
Yeah.
I cringe when I watch some of these plays. I mean, there are major injuries, it seems, every week to different players at every position. How much of this are they feeling later in life? And how much damage is done to these guys who are, in their 40s, 50s, and 60s thinking about a game they played 3 decades earlier?
Well, yeah, I mean, their bodies are never quite right. But, I do think that, I think that the most brutal time for football was actually in the 70s because it was really when the head became a weapon. And so the guys who played during that time, and a lot of these guys were playing on AstroTurf that was essentially concrete. And so it was whatever brutality football had, it was magnified and amplified by the circumstances by which they played. And I think that like since then, things have changed. I mean, um, you still hear stories, obviously. Brett Favre, you know what I mean? He talks openly about um, his worries with his mental capacity. But like, I think that like, in one interesting aspect, I get at this in the book, and that's because like quarterback in a lot of ways now has never been more celebrated, and in a lot of ways it's never been easier to play because rule changes have just opened things up for the passing game in high school, in college, and in the NFL. And so you have this situation where quarterback is getting easier, passing numbers have exploded, and is there going to be a tipping point where, because of the way that football has to go, which, look, flag football is going to continue to rise, but like danger is a essential component, I think, of quarterbacking and what makes it so alluring and fascinating. And as the danger of the game recedes a little bit, what happened, and as the passing numbers continue to go up, and guys who maybe aren't great quarterbacks put up unbelievable numbers because of the way that the game is, what will happen to the role of quarterback in American society? Like, will it be as celebrated? Or are we kind of at a tipping point where, like, as it becomes, as home run hitters begin to hit more home runs, it devalued all of them. And, you know, you're obviously always going to have like a guy like Aaron Judge, who's just like an all-time great, but will the idea of quarterback suffer a little bit as more people are able to do it well?
A few years ago, being a quarterback sort of went through a political revolution. The game went through a political revolution. Colin Kaepernick, of course, became a household
Yeah.
name. How has that changed the way quarterbacks handle politics? Obviously, Tom Brady is, sort of dipped his toe in. Um, what's your view of that in terms of the way these guys not only handle the enormous pressure of their team and of their city, and they have a lot on their shoulders already, but in some ways they began to be looked to for either an opinion or
Yeah.
not expressing an opinion?
Well, that's the thing, right? Is that, like, again, people look at you for things that maybe you're not as um knowledgeable on. You know what I mean? They look at you again, the public looks at quarterbacks differently. They all want hope and they all want to be led. And Kaepernick is just it's a horrifically tragic case. And um, I reported a lot on that at ESPN with my colleague Don Van Natta, and how the league handled Kaepernick and the kneelers the year after Kaepernick's first year out of the league in 2017, where things really hit um, an apex, with President Trump coming after the kneelers and the league and the owners kind of scrambling about what to do. Um, I think that, like, what's happened is that we don't see a lot of daring um, sort of non-sport stands out of quarterbacks now. I think that, like, again, the attention is so intense on them that I think that most of them don't want to become that kind of vague and um, thin of a term in the football world, a distraction. And so Aaron Rodgers obviously has been a little bit of an exception to that rule, but, like, even so nowadays,
I think Jalen
he's kind of,
Hurts, just even going to the White House became a big thing.
yeah, and it is, and then it passes over, and like John Elway didn't go to the White House when they won the Super Bowl, and
Who was
you know
president then? Was it Clinton?
Clinton.
Clinton was president, yeah.
And so, like, it happens, and then it's like things kind of move on. But it's like, again, what Kaepernick did, I think, was incredibly um, courageous, and it got twisted and misrepresented. I mean, he did something quietly. He didn't do it. He's not a chatty guy. He did something that he believes was right, and you know he didn't go out and try to advertise. It was other people who spotted him doing it and asked him about it, and only after that did he speak up. But I think that, like, even for him, I think that he was ill prepared for how much notoriety and attention came, and controversy came, with the stand that he took.
Hmm. All right, a couple quick ones before we get out of here. Just quick, what when we're watching on Sunday, which I guess is today, what do you want us to notice about quarterbacks that we've never noticed before?
Mm. It's a great question. No one's asked me that. Um, I think the best quarterbacks they're radical simplifiers. And so and I think that this goes throughout history. But like I think that like what they're able to do is it's not 11 on 11. I think that they look at it more like 2 on 11, where they have one receiver that they really want to throw to on a given play. They do what they can to get that receiver open, whether it's moving their shoulders or moving their eyes, whatever it might be. And if that guy's not there, they're looking to dump the ball off. And if not, then they're throwing the ball away and they'll live another down. Like that's what Tom Brady, Joe Montana, so many of these guys were so good at. And it's one of the reasons why they played so long is because they didn't expose themselves to as many hits. And I think that like the quarterbacks who are masters know how to get rid of the ball fast and be decisive. And the quarterbacks who aren't tend to hold the ball longer. And I think that like those are the things that um, you can tell a quarterback's level of greatness by how quickly they get rid of the ball.
Who is the best quarterback ever, and why is it Tom Brady?
I mean, the hard
Or
thing,
maybe not, but that's in my view.
well, no, it's true, but it's like, look, you have to look at everything by era. Because I do think that like era matters and circumstances and like context matters. Like, but it with when you look at like the things that you would use to try to determine great quarterbacks, how often they win, how they performed on the biggest stage, how often they were able to perform well on the biggest stage, those types of things. Everything Brady has done, he eclipses everyone, and so um, it's just fascinating, and his longevity and his sheer longevity of it. I mean, when you look at LeBron versus Jordan, LeBron has just played longer and at a higher level, and so there's a huge momentum for LeBron being the greatest NBA player ever. And I think that like when you look at Brady, just the fact that like he walked away at age 45 on his terms, and he probably could have played another couple of years at a pretty high level. And so it's really hard, even if again he wasn't playing in the 80s or the 70s when the game was much more physical. It's hard to look at his body of work and see anything other than the greatest ever.
I love asking about dedications to our authors who come on this
Yeah,
show. Your dedication is for all who try.
yeah.
What did that mean?
All the everyone who's ever tried to do this, because again, it's not, with all due respect to your Yankees, it's
Mets,
different than
excuse me,
playing.
Mets.
Oh, Mets.
Mets.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's different than playing
We
center
don't we
field
don't
for
you
the
don't have to
Yankees.
respect the Yankees. It's fine.
It's different than playing center field for the Yankees in the 60s. It's just you're taking on awesome levels of responsibility when you decide to do this job. And again, that's one of, not to harp on it, but it's one of the most interesting things. Is it like for the people who do it at the highest level, making the perfect pass at the exact time is ends up being the thing that kind of is the easiest part of the job for them. It's everything else. It's everything that we've put upon it that makes it hard.
Do you know if you'll do another book?
Oh, sure. I've got a collection of my work that'll be out in a year, and then I want to get going on whatever the next project is sooner rather than later. My friends and I joke that writing books is no way to live, and yet it's also a great way to live. It stretches writing a book will stretch your mind to dangerous places, but
Is it
you
going to be
know,
football or is it going to be
um,
yeah,
I don't know. I haven't
maybe
figured
another
it out yet.
position, goaltender, hockey goalie or something?
Yeah. American princes, Canadian kings.
Right. Canadian. That's
Yeah, I
good.
don't,
Canadian.
I don't know. I doubt that. I don't think I'd want to like kind of franchise that, but I think that like, you know, it took me a while, but I realized the difference between being interested in something that's a great magazine story and being interested in something that's a full book. And so, not everything is a book. And I think that like I want to be choosy with it because when you write a book, the idea has to always be worthy of it. And if it's not, then you're in trouble. Like Michael Lewis, this is crazy. I didn't know this, but Mike until recently, but Michael Lewis wrote a sequel to Moneyball, arguably the most successful sports book ever. Um, he spent 2 years on it and then didn't write it. And
Wow.
I couldn't, it's like at the end of the day, he didn't see a book in that story, even after 2 years of working on it. And, I'm not putting myself in Michael Lewis's category, although he's a dear person and someone I've become friends with. But like just the fact that he did that shows how hard this job is. Um, you know, trying to write a book that hopefully stands up, stands the test of time.
Well, we're like Shakespeare. We ended where we started with Michael Lewis, I guess, right?
Yes.
Seth Wickersham, the author of American Kings, a biography of the quarterback. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, man. Great to talk to you.
Check out the book and also his page on the website formerly known as Twitter at Seth Wickersham. AxelBankHistory.com was designed by Nikki Rideout of Ellie Claire Designs. It has our most recent episodes, featured episodes, and also a link to our Patreon page. So check out Nikki's work. And I want to invite listeners to that page. Go to patreon.com/AxelBankHistory. We will donate part of your contributions to a charity for children's literacy. And thank you for listening to Axelbank Reports History and Today, conversations with America's top nonfiction authors and why their books matter right now. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Axelbank History. We update those with clips from the show, guest announcements, and book recommendations. See you next time. Thanks.